Prioritizing foundational behaviors over supplementation is the most important principle in longevity because the core biological systems that determine how you age are primarily shaped by daily habits, not isolated compounds. The pathways most closely tied to aging, such as metabolic health, inflammation, hormone regulation, and cellular repair, are all highly responsive to behaviors like sleep, nutrition, movement, and stress management. Supplements can influence some of these pathways, but they operate within the limits set by those foundational inputs. Sleep is one of the most powerful regulators of longevity-related processes. During sleep, the brain and body engage in repair mechanisms that include clearing metabolic waste, regulating immune function, and balancing hormones. Poor or inconsistent sleep disrupts these processes, leading to increased inflammation, impaired glucose metabolism, and reduced cognitive function over time. No supplement can replicate the full range of restorative effects that occur during high-quality sleep. Even compounds that support relaxation or sleep onset do not replace the structural and physiological benefits of consistent sleep cycles. Nutrition provides both the energy and the molecular building blocks required for cellular function. The quality, timing, and quantity of food intake influence insulin sensitivity, mitochondrial efficiency, and inflammatory status. Diets that are balanced and aligned with energy need support stable blood glucose levels and reduce chronic stress on metabolic systems. While certain supplements can fill specific gaps or provide targeted support, they cannot compensate for a diet that consistently disrupts these core processes. Physical activity is another major driver of longevity. Exercise directly impacts mitochondrial health, cardiovascular function, muscle mass, and brain plasticity. It also improves insulin sensitivity and reduces systemic inflammation. These effects are broad and interconnected, influencing multiple systems at once. In contrast, most supplements target a narrow pathway and produce a much smaller overall effect. This is why exercise is often described as having pleiotropic benefits, meaning it positively affects many aspects of biology simultaneously. Stress regulation is equally important because chronic psychological or physiological stress elevates cortisol and other stress-related hormones. Over time, this can impair immune function, disrupt sleep, and accelerate aspects of aging. Practices that help regulate stress, such as controlled breathing, mindfulness, or structured downtime, have measurable effects on these systems. Again, while some supplements may support relaxation or modulate stress responses, they do not address the root causes in the same comprehensive way. Another important aspect is that these foundational behaviors interact with each other. Poor sleep can lead to worse dietary choices, reduced motivation for exercise, and increased stress reactivity. Similarly, regular physical activity can improve sleep quality and metabolic health. This interconnectedness creates a compounding effect, where improving one area often benefits others. Supplements, by comparison, tend to act in isolation and do not create the same level of systemic change. When these core behaviors are optimized, the body is already operating in a state that supports longevity. In that context, certain supplements may provide additional targeted benefits. However, without that foundation, their effects are often minimal or inconsistent. This is why focusing on behaviors first creates the greatest return on effort, while supplementation remains a secondary and more specific tool. Targeting cellular energy systems, particularly mitochondria and NAD metabolism, is a central theme in longevity research because these systems govern how efficiently cells produce and use energy. Mitochondria are responsible for generating ATP, the primary energy currency of the cell, and their function tends to decline with age. This decline is associated with reduced physical performance, impaired metabolic health, and increased vulnerability to stress at the cellular level. Because of this, compounds that aim to support mitochondrial function have become a major focus in the context of supplements for longevity. One of the key molecules involved in this process is NAD, or nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. NAD plays a critical role in redox reactions, which are essential for energy production, and it also serves as a cofactor for enzymes involved in DNA repair and cellular maintenance. Levels of NAD naturally decline with age, which has led to the hypothesis that restoring or increasing NAD levels could support healthier aging. This is where supplements like NMN and NR come into the discussion, as they are precursors that the body can convert into NAD. In animal studies, increasing NAD levels through these precursors has shown promising effects, including improvements in metabolic function, mitochondrial activity, and some markers associated with aging. These findings have generated significant interest, but translating these results to humans is more complex. In human studies, NMN and NR have been shown to increase NAD levels in the bloodstream, which confirms that they are biologically active. However, the extent to which this increase leads to meaningful improvements in long-term health performance or lifespan is still being studied. One important consideration is that raising NAD levels in the blood does not necessarily mean that all tissues in the body experience the same effect. Different tissues have different capacities for uptake and utilization, and the relationship between circulating NAD and intracellular function is not fully understood. This means that while the mechanism is promising, the real-world impact may vary depending on factors like age, baseline health, and overall lifestyle. Another key point is that the same pathways influenced by these supplements are also strongly affected by behavior. Exercise, for example, is one of the most effective ways to enhance mitochondrial function and increase the activity of enzymes that depend on NAD. Caloric balance and certain forms of dietary stress, such as intermittent fasting, can also influence these pathways by activating systems involved in energy sensing and repair. These behavioral inputs often produce more robust and well-documented effects than supplementation alone. There's also the question of efficiency and necessity. If the body's natural systems for maintaining NAD levels are functioning well, adding precursors may have a limited impact. In contrast, individuals with metabolic dysfunction or age-related decline may experience more noticeable effects, although this is still an area of active research. This highlights the importance of context when evaluating whether a supplement targeting these pathways is likely to be beneficial. Overall, while targeting mitochondrial function and NAD metabolism is scientifically grounded and potentially valuable, it represents a specific piece of a much larger system. The effectiveness of these supplements depends not only on their ability to alter a single pathway, but on how that change integrates with the broader biological environment shaped by lifestyle and individual variability. Managing inflammation and oxidative stress is central to longevity because these processes influence how quickly cells and tissues accumulate damage over time. Inflammation is a natural and necessary response of the immune system, helping the body respond to injury or infection. However, when inflammation becomes chronic and low-grade, it can begin to damage healthy tissues and disrupt normal cellular function. This persistent state, often referred to as inflammaging, is strongly associated with many age-related conditions, including cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders, and neurodegeneration. Oxidative stress is closely linked to this process. It occurs when there is an imbalance between the production of reactive oxygen species and the body's ability to neutralize them. These reactive molecules are a normal byproduct of metabolism, especially within mitochondria, but when they accumulate beyond the body's capacity to manage them, they can damage proteins, lipids, and DNA. Over time, this damage contributes to the gradual decline in cellular function that characterizes aging. Certain supplements are often discussed in the context of reducing inflammation and oxidative stress, but their effectiveness depends on both the strength of the evidence and how they interact with the body's existing systems. Omega-3 fatty acids are among the most well-supported in this category. They play a role in modulating inflammatory pathways by influencing the production of signaling molecules that regulate immune responses. Regular intake of omega-3s has been associated with improvements in cardiovascular health, partly through reducing inflammation and improving lipid profiles. Other compounds, such as polyphenols found in plants, are also studied for their potential antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. These include substances like curcumin, resveratrol, and flavonoids. In controlled settings, many of these compounds show the ability to influence cellular pathways related to inflammation and oxidative stress. However, one of the main challenges is bioavailability, meaning how well these compounds are absorbed and utilized by the body. In many cases, the amount that reaches target tissues is limited, which can reduce their overall impact. It is also important to understand that the body already has its own antioxidant systems, including enzymes like superoxide, dismutase, and glutathione. These systems are highly responsive to lifestyle factors such as diet and exercise. Regular physical activity, for example, can enhance the body's internal antioxidant capacity, making it more effective at managing oxidative stress. This highlights a key point. Supplements may support these systems, but they do not replace the body's intrinsic mechanisms. Another consideration is balance. Not all oxidative stress is harmful. In fact, small amounts act as signals that trigger beneficial adaptations, such as increased mitochondrial efficiency. Oversuppressing these signals with excessive antioxidant supplementation could potentially interfere with these adaptive processes. This means that more is not always better, and the goal is to support balance rather than eliminate these processes entirely. The overall impact of supplements targeting inflammation and oxidative stress depends on context, including baseline health, diet, and lifestyle. While certain compounds like omega-3s have consistent evidence supporting their use, many others produce variable results. Their role is best understood as supportive, working alongside broader behaviors that more powerfully regulate these fundamental processes. Supporting metabolic health through insulin sensitivity and nutrient regulation is a central pillar of longevity because the way your body processes and distributes energy influences nearly every major system involved in aging. When metabolic function is efficient, cells are able to take in glucose, produce energy, and maintain stable internal conditions without excessive stress. When this system becomes impaired, as in the case of insulin resistance, it leads to elevated blood glucose, increased inflammation, and greater strain on organs such as the pancreas, liver, and cardiovascular system. Insulin is a key hormone in this process because it regulates how cells absorb glucose from the bloodstream. In a healthy state, insulin signals cells to take in glucose and either use it for energy or store it for later use. However, when cells become less responsive to insulin, the body compensates by producing more of it. Over time, this can lead to chronically elevated insulin and glucose levels, both of which are associated with accelerated aging and increased risk of diseases such as type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular conditions. Certain supplements have been studied for their ability to improve insulin sensitivity and support metabolic regulation. Berberine is one of the most well-known examples. It is a plant-derived compound that has been shown to activate pathways such as AMPK, which is involved in energy sensing and metabolic balance. Activation of this pathway can improve glucose uptake, reduce glucose production in the liver, and enhance overall metabolic efficiency. In some studies, berberine has demonstrated effects comparable to common medications used to manage blood sugar levels, although individual responses can vary. Another area of interest involves pathways that regulate growth and repair, particularly those influenced by nutrient availability. Pathways like mTOR and AMPK respond to signals related to energy intake, protein consumption, and overall metabolic state. When nutrients are abundant, growth pathways tend to be more active, supporting tissue building and repair. When energy is limited, pathways associated with maintenance and cellular cleanup become more prominent. This balance is important because chronic overactivation of growth signals may contribute to aging processes, while periodic activation of repair pathways supports cellular health. While some supplements aim to influence these pathways, lifestyle factors tend to have a much stronger and more consistent effect. Diet composition, meal timing, and physical activity all play major roles in regulating insulin sensitivity and metabolic function. For example, regular exercise increases the ability of muscles to take up glucose independently of insulin, which improves overall metabolic control. Similarly, maintaining a balanced diet with appropriate energy intake helps prevent the chronic elevation of glucose and insulin. It is also important to consider that metabolic health is highly individualized. Factors such as genetics, baseline fitness, and existing health conditions can influence how the body responds to both supplements and lifestyle changes. This means that while compounds like berberine can be effective for some individuals, they are not universally necessary or beneficial. Overall, supplements that target metabolic pathways can provide support in specific contexts, particularly when there is some degree of dysfunction. However, their effects are typically most meaningful when combined with behaviors that address the underlying drivers of metabolic health rather than used as a standalone solution. Balancing protein intake and amino acid signaling is an important factor in longevity because it sits at the intersection of maintaining physical function and regulating cellular growth pathways. Protein is essential for preserving muscle mass, supporting immune function, and enabling tissue repair. As people age, the natural tendency is to lose muscle, a process known as sarcopenia, which is strongly associated with reduced mobility, increased risk of injury, and overall decline in health. Adequate protein intake helps counteract this process by providing the amino acids necessary for maintaining and rebuilding muscle tissue. At the same time, Protein intake influences key signaling pathways in the body, particularly those related to growth and metabolism. One of the most important of these is the mTOR pathway, which is activated by amino acids, especially leucine. mTOR plays a central role in promoting protein synthesis and cellular growth, which is beneficial for maintaining muscle and recovering from stress. However, there is a trade-off because chronic overactivation of growth pathways has been linked in some models to accelerated aging and reduced cellular repair processes. This creates a balance that needs to be managed rather than a simple rule of increasing or decreasing protein intake. Too little protein leads to muscle loss and reduced physical resilience, while excessive or poorly timed intake may keep growth pathways constantly elevated. The goal is to provide enough protein to support function and recovery while allowing periods where the body can shift into maintenance and repair modes. This balance is influenced not only by how much protein you consume, but also by when you consume it and how it is distributed throughout the day. Certain supplements come into play in this context, particularly those that provide specific amino acids or support connective tissue. For example, branched-chain amino acids are often used to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, although their effectiveness depends on overall protein intake and activity levels. Collagen peptides are another commonly used supplement, aimed at supporting joints, skin, and connective tissue. While collagen is not a complete protein, it provides amino acids like glycine and proline that are important for structural integrity. Glycine itself has gained attention not only for its role in collagen formation, but also for its potential effects on sleep quality and metabolic balance. It may help offset some of the effects of higher methionine intake, an amino acid found in many protein sources, which has been linked in some research to aging-related pathways. This highlights how different amino acids can have distinct roles beyond simply contributing to total protein intake. Another key factor is physical activity. Resistance training, in particular, increases the body's sensitivity to protein intake by enhancing muscle protein synthesis. This means that the same amount of protein can have a greater effect when combined with regular exercise. Without this stimulus, higher protein intake alone is less effective at preserving muscle mass. Overall, the relationship between protein, amino acids, and longevity is not about maximizing or minimizing intake, but about aligning it with the body's needs and rhythms. Supplements can support specific aspects of this system, but their effectiveness depends heavily on the broader context of diet, activity, and overall metabolic health. Accounting for individual variability and using objective measurements is essential when evaluating supplement efficacy because the effects of any compound depend heavily on the specific biology of the person taking it. There is no universal response to supplements, even when the underlying mechanisms are well understood. Factors such as genetics, age, baseline health, diet, sleep quality, and activity levels all influence how a supplement is absorbed, metabolized, and ultimately whether it produces a meaningful effect. One of the main reasons for this variability is that supplements often target pathways that may already be functioning well in some individuals and less efficiently in others. If a particular system, such as mitochondrial function, inflammation control, or glucose regulation, is already optimized through lifestyle and genetics, adding a supplement aimed at that pathway may produce little to no noticeable benefit. In contrast, if there is a deficiency or dysfunction in that system, the same supplement could have a more significant impact. This makes context a critical factor in determining whether supplementation is useful. Genetic differences also play a role in how the body processes certain compounds. Variations in enzymes involved in metabolism can affect how quickly a supplement is broken down, how much of it becomes bioavailable, and how strongly it interacts with its target pathways. This means that two individuals taking the same dose of the same supplement may experience very different outcomes, both in terms of effectiveness and side effects. Because of this variability, relying solely on subjective feelings is not always sufficient to evaluate whether a supplement is working. While changes in energy, mood, or performance can provide useful clues, they can also be influenced by many other factors. Objective measurements provide a more reliable way to assess impact. These can include blood markers such as glucose levels, lipid profiles, inflammatory markers, or hormone levels, depending on the supplement and the pathway it is intended to influence. Tracking performance metrics is another valuable approach. For example, changes in strength, endurance, cognitive performance, or recovery time can offer insight into whether a supplement is having a functional effect. These measurements help create a clearer link between the intervention and the outcome, reducing the likelihood of attributing changes to the wrong cause. It is also important to consider timing and consistency when evaluating supplements. Some compounds may produce acute effects, while others require sustained use over weeks or months to influence biological systems. Without consistent use and proper tracking, it becomes difficult to determine whether any observed changes are meaningful or simply due to normal fluctuations. Another key aspect is minimizing variables. Introducing multiple supplements at the same time makes it nearly impossible to identify which one is responsible for any changes. A more effective approach is to introduce one variable at a time and monitor its effects before adding another. This allows for a clearer understanding of cause and effect. Over time, this approach turns supplementation into a more precise and data-driven process rather than one based on assumptions or trends. Instead of following generalized recommendations, you build a personalized understanding of what actually works for your bile. When all of these factors are considered together, foundational habits, targeted pathways, inflammation control, metabolic health, protein balance, and individual variability, you begin to see that supplements are not a shortcut to longevity, but a tool that must be used with precision and context. The most effective approach is one where behavior establishes a strong biological baseline, and supplementation is layered on with clear intent and measurable outcomes. Over time, this creates a more personalized and evidence-driven strategy where each decision is guided not by trends, but by how your body actually responds.